everyone. Thanks for inviting me today to come and speak. And I'll try to add some value. And I've been chasing around 3 kids this morning, so I missed most of the morning session. But it looks like there's been a lot of good information. If I'm overlapping too much with what was said earlier, just give me a shout and I'll just move it along. But yeah, we do multifamily properties. We've been doing it. Let me see if the slides work. Perfect. Yeah, so multifamily projects, just again, like I think everyone's saying, this half an hour thing is pretty abbreviated for what we could be going through. And I don't talk a lot, but even for me, half an hour is pretty limited. So I'll try to just kind of keep it brief and go through it and keep some time for question and answers at the end. I'll give a brief reflection back. Not so far, but for the last 10 or 11 years, we've been familiar with doing multi-family properties in Toronto. And there's been a lot of change, especially in the last 3 or 4 years. Here and now, what's going on now, everyone's talking about 4+1 and a few other things that are on the horizon. And then what does that mean going forward from there? Just briefly about me. I'm a licensed architect to practice anywhere in Ontario. I went to school for it in Canada, and I lead a group of 6 full-time architectural staff. We're architectural only, so we're designers and architects. We work with engineers as needed for structural, mechanical, electrical reasons, planning, design, and construction. So a lot of times on these small projects, they aren't the scale where you're able to hire a planner and all these different consultants. So just by getting into these granular scale projects, we have familiarity with the front end, with the planning work, municipal approvals and things like that. And personally, I've had my own construction experience building my own houses and just familiarity with real conditions on site, which lends well to working well with some builders, some of who are in the room. We can speak the same language. So that's, I guess, briefly about us. We're based in Leslieville, just on the east side of Toronto. Contrary to what Andre said, we do all sorts of buildings. So if you do want, really nice houses or a diversity of building types, we do kind of all sorts to keep it interesting. I show this. This was a international competition we won last year in the beaches for a winter station, just an art installation. So even though these types of projects are really practical, functional, driven by math and making sense and making money, there's that creative side that I think all the architects have that really, I think, lends well to problem solving in these projects and not something to be overlooked. This is just a brief history. Where's the clock, by the way? Okay. Multi-family projects. 10 years ago, there was this overarching need to make them look like houses and really just integrate with what a single family house might look like or a semi-detached. These are some earlier examples of just something that might look like a house in the neighborhood, and that was kind of important to fit the mold in terms of what the policy was asking for. So we made multis that look like that. These are examples of some bigger properties, luxurious properties that there's nothing to say you couldn't introduce a secondary suite in a property like this and have even part of a basement be an income property and still have a really nice luxurious home to live in. And then as we kind of move along, there's just less of a need to kind of fit the mold of what a semi-detached or detached property in terms of a house looks like. So we're starting to see policies change and just limitations on building height and length and appearance change. So there's just this opportunity now for this new mix of housing typologies in Toronto. Policies are more inclusive of multi-unit. Jaden was saying a term as of right in relation to a fourplex, and that is the case for kind of across the city of Toronto, and there's even more permissions in certain areas in Toronto for, say, 10 units on one property, or even up to 60 now that I'm sure people are starting to acclimate to. And just a few more examples here. On the far right is a garden suite that we're interested to see getting built in the 4+1 model. So this is kind of a diagram to On the left, I've kind of just listed why now, like why do this 5-unit project, and I think a lot of the financing folks earlier have spoken to why it makes sense. But I guess just to reiterate from a design perspective, as of right zoning, so in 2023, there was a new bylaw that was introduced. Previously, like even a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex had to be smaller than a single family home on a same size lot in an area. And this bylaw came out and basically said, no, we're actually encouraging these types of projects now so they can be bigger, taller, and it just increases the flexibility for accommodating what are usually smaller units on a smaller lot. Laneway houses and garden suites, everyone's familiar with. Parking exemptions, so this used to be a sticking point for doing, say, 4 units on a lot. There was a requirement to have 4 parking on the lot, the equivalent number of parking to units. Those maximum or minimums became maximums now. So yeah, and in some of our lots that, like we were saying, it's across Toronto now. It's not so much a question of like needing to meet the requirements, but like Jaden was saying, if you are close to transit and things like that, great. If you're not, it's more a question of you, the developer or the builder, of like, do we want to provide parking on the lot? Because you are allowed to, and then there's some areas across the city, maybe it makes sense to include them. So on some of our wider, bigger lots, they're not quite downtown. We're able to fit 3 surface parking or something along those lines at the back of the property to suit the area. Yeah, just a question.
Yeah, what's your experience in being able to get more than 1 parking space on a lot that is being renovated from a single family that has 1 space? Or have you been able to get more than 1 from the city?
Yeah, in a lot of the downtown locations, we're kind of limited at 1 or 0. With a minor variance, you can get 1. On bigger lots that are 50-foot frontages, we're able to fit 3 as of right in a lot of scenarios, and that's helpful. On those bigger lots as well, the new bylaw makes it so permissive that it's no longer a question of like, let's build as much as we can. It's like, let's not overbuild almost, because the pro forma, from what I hear back, is like a 3-bedroom, 2 bathrooms, kind of the maximum usable or useful unit size. So like an extra den or anything wouldn't yield extra rent. So let's cut our construction costs and just keep it at the right scale. Yeah, I can jump into more questions at the end. Yeah, development charge exemptions, up to 4 units on any property is exempt. I think that's what Jaden was mentioning just in the previous presentation. It's about $250,000 of development charges that are just exempt for that project type. New construction tax exemption. So we used to have to work with existing structures, and there's still some reasons to work with existing structures for grandfathered setback conditions and things like that when you're adding to a property, if you want to keep setbacks. But now new construction for rental is exempt from tax, additional taxes. So we're seeing more and more that just new build, high performing buildings are their preference and being leaned towards, instead of trying to work through construction difficulties with old foundation walls and things like that. Yeah, and growing NIMBY population. So yes, in my backyard, there's still NIMBYs and people who are against the idea of multi-unit properties, but we're seeing more of a balanced population now, with people just realizing we need more housing, especially with high-rise slowdowns or just the lack of a mix of unit types in Toronto. Potential to stratify, condominiumize. Some of our projects are going that route, so different from MLI long-term financing, they're looking to condominiumize and then sell. And a fit study is something I came up with Andre a while ago. This is kind of when you're looking at a lot and trying to assess it for, is it the ideal lot? And there's a whole bunch of effort that goes into that in terms of where it's located, but we can be a part of it in terms of identifying any red flags, whether it be existing conditions of neighboring structures, trees in the area that, it just adds risk to the project in terms of like, it's not maybe a definite, like you can start building on day one, but there's some factors to consider. Some of those are to do with this diagram. We're showing like a 0.9 meter side yard setback. Not all the units can always enter off the front at the street. So there's need to access some of the units from the back of the property, which can include the laneway suite as well. This map, if you haven't seen it, it's Toronto zoning map. And it's really just opening the door on multiplexes in the 4+1 scale. Everything that's yellow can be a 4+1 in terms of where it's located across the city. So there's a lot of land to cover there. And it's really that fit study that I was just mentioning, that like, is this an ideal spot in terms, not can we do it here? This is another slight variation on the 4+1. It's just a garden suite instead of a laneway suite. The laneway suite has fronting on a lane, where a garden suite is just in a backyard that we're seeing more commonly in the Etobicoke, Scarborough, and North York boroughs. A lot of Toronto has laneways where it becomes a laneway suite, but there's some limitations on setbacks from the side versus the previous diagram, as well as these angular planes that are part of the garden suite as of right guidelines. As of right being a good thing to shorten up your construction timeline, but if you are looking for a variance, that would be a way to get rid of these or reduce these guidelines. These are just diagrams I've shown before of the spacing of that you want on a lot. Everyone's like, oh, is this a good lot? Is that a good lot? Roughly 20 to 25 feet of frontage is kind of like your space minimums. There are benefits to wider lots that you can have increased setbacks, you can have wider buildings, you can have more window openings, but this is kind of, if you're trying to do more with less, this is kind of where the project starts to make sense. In the residential zone, there's different variations of residential zones. There's R, RD, RS, RM. The R zone is the most flexible in terms of reduced setbacks. So yeah, I think it works really well for the lower end of this scale at the 20-foot wide frontage, whereas in some of the other lots, side setbacks are 1.2 meters. So you already have less of a building, so maybe you want to start at a 25-foot lot. And the depth really is just, can be variable depending on where your front yard setback is in relation to the invisible lot line, unless you have a property survey in hand. Sometimes if the neighbors are set back less, you can also set back less. But the 7.5 meters is a requirement between the laneway suite or garden suite and the main building. So everything just scales off of that. This is what article in the Toronto Star last month. One of our projects was mentioned, and the owner at the time declined to comment because they didn't want to draw attention to it. So I'm going to announce it to everyone here because it's since been approved as a condominium, so they're not as concerned anymore about any negative attention. But yeah, just an alternate strategy if more of a short-term hold than a sell is an idea, and these seem to be really attractive in some of the areas served by transit. To your comment earlier about a vehicle, this project of ours actually has a shared vehicle between the 4 residences in this case, so it's kind of an asset to be able to provide it as a condo shared elements. And we're doing some of these in some really nice areas that people want to live in. If it wasn't an as of right condition, you could imagine the backlash of we've seen in some recent committee of adjustment applications of just widespread opposition to fourplexes. But if we can fit them as of right, it's straight to building permit, so it's a nice way to circumvent that. Just cutting through some of the projects in terms of what they look like on the inside. So this is, I guess, the most conventional model of just a basement and 3 stories and just dividing the units up, one on each floor, separating them by fire separations and sound separations between the floors, and then the ancillary building. Some, different items to play with here. It could be just an entire single-family detached laneway suite or garden suite there is an option to include parking. One of our projects, we actually did a parking stacker that brought, it could fit 2 cars in, and you would bring one below grade and you could stack them on top of each other. And there is option for shared elements. So in this one, there was a gym home office space as a part of the garden suite as well. Another variation, I think I've shown these before, but this is just to get an idea of the flexibility and the play you can have with these types of buildings. 2-story units, one facing the front, one facing the back on the upper 2 levels, and then more conventional single-story units on the ground floor and basement. In some of our wider lots now in Etobicoke, these 2-story units are making a lot of sense, but we can do them, imagine with me for a second, side by side, 2-story units, one on top of each other. So more resembling a stacked townhouse, stacked detached townhouse. So 2nd and 3rd story left, 2nd, 3rd story right, ground and basement left, ground and basement right. So everyone has access to the front of the building, the back of the building, and you could even fit a garden suite or laneway suite as well to get to that 5-unit configuration. This one's more set up like a townhouse, so there's not really any units above or below. It's nice for sound separation and yeah, just the different types of spaces you can have in a building, whether it's a primary bedroom floor, kid bedroom floor, living room floor, and then like a basement rec room. Yeah, we just like to play in different ways with these types of buildings. Now this is just jumping to a second scale that I think it makes a lot of sense, and we have some projects underway now, some that are under construction, that cap at a 10-unit on a single property. So the draw to these now is that recently Toronto has exempted these projects from site plan approval. So it's kind of a lengthy front-end process before you could start to build, and lengthy and costly that is no longer applicable. So dropping these into residential R zones is a opportunity that's there. Likely still needs a minor variance application, but with the right justification based on location, proximity to transit, and the neighborhood context, something that is a viable option. And yeah, same opportunity to stratify or condominiumize as an option, but an interesting one. This is the exploded axonometric view. We just showed the different unit types that can all fit into, in the previous slide, looks like pretty low-rise, integrated, but on the inside, 10 units going on, 10 families to suit the different kind of family makeups that we have in our city. This one is more of a conventional setup in that there's a lobby and 2 exit stairs, and with access to all the floors, and then 2 to 4 units on each of the floors, depending on the floor. There's another version of a 10-plex that can just be walk-up townhouses that is a nice one as well. There's 0 unleasable floor area, relatively speaking, so each of the units can just enter directly into the unit, and it's just a bit more efficient from a floor area perspective. And then jumping to a third scale, this is on major streets with a bylaw that was just passed last year. Site plan approval, contrary to the previous example of 10 units, is still applicable, but the scale of building that you're allowed to build now on the major streets is up to 6 stories and up to 60 units. That's as an apartment building style, or up to 4 stories as a townhouse. And for this type of project, we're finding as we're laying them out, you do want larger than 50-foot lots if you're really trying to get to that upper echelon of number of units, but there's nothing to say that you can't reduce the units and do it on a smaller lot frontage. Yeah, and this was actually a project we did a number of years ago, but I just think back to it because of the lengthy rezoning and kind of front-end process that was attached to this project. Under the new model, could now be something that happens a lot faster and makes a lot more sense, even if it did make sense 5 years ago.
Adam, I have a quick question.
Yep.
The business model that was used for the 6-story kind of apartment building there, DCs being a major factor, right, when you're doing one of these. Was the business model based around a rental business model then, or was it like a condominium?
That one was a purpose-built rental. Yeah, it was one of the earlier ones that we've seen in Toronto, and purpose-built rental is now a term that is more familiar, but that one was purpose-built rental. It did have development charges applied to each of the units, just a more conventional development. And yeah, kind of a missing middle, like early days project that, yeah, now it's making more sense with the newer policies. This map, contrary to the one that was just coded in yellow, it's only these gold-colored bands that are along these major streets that are the zones that they've identified for these 60-unit projects on major streets. It still covers a ton of ground. Again, there's no parking minimums. Yeah, it's just maximums, but it's really, there's some of the projects we're working on that are not quite close to the core, not quite close to transit, that we're trying to add parking into them just to make the building make sense. There's one out in Scarborough that we're looking at a 25% parking ratio. So 45 units and about 11 or 12 parking spaces, just as the right amount to suit the tenants that are going to be moving in there. Yeah, and then this is just this is a new idea that I just added at the last second, but I think I called it the city transportation parallel. So this was an argument to push for transit and bike and just being less congested along the streets. And I kind of, for whatever reason, like to draw parallels, but this is just showing that, like, you know, we still need single family dwellings, but kind of moving forward, I'm interested to continue to work on these multifamily low rise and multifamily mid rise to kind of create this like balanced housing options in Toronto. So yeah, that was just kind of a step back in terms of like why I'm doing it, and here's our information. And I think I stopped at the right time just to have a few minutes for questions. But yeah.
Hey. Questions for Adam?
Earlier, you mentioned the two different kind of layouts for the fourplexes, one being 4 units, one being each unit on the floor, versus third and fourth floor being back to back. Do you have any insight from your other clients and audience how the tenants with which one, which layout is better?
Yeah, like I think we just, you know, this is probably what I just go to in terms of when I talk with clients. Let's just see what the site gives us, because we're playing with inches really in terms of the width on these lots. So if we get a few more inches of width, stairs become you know, more viable. If we're narrower, less viable. There's when you go into the spaces, sometimes when you see, and I guess it's before drywall, but you see the full extent of a unit on the floor, it feels really big, and to a lesser degree once the bedrooms are kind of niched out of it. But I think there's still yeah, I mean, we've had projects go both ways, just because from a tenant perspective, might seem undesirable to have to go up 2 flights of stairs to enter into your unit on the top floor. Might be desirable that you occupy the top floor, versus the back-to-back model, which is kind of reflected here in the almost red and yellow. But just entering onto the living space floor, 1 story up, seems really ideal. And then it's more of a conventional house within, like a conventional 2-story house with a living room floor and a bedroom floor. But I think what maybe turns it is if you can get a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, if the single story 3-bedroom starts to work, maybe that's the turning point in terms of what performs better.
I'd just add on to that, because I think we bring a perspective from the tenant side. I think if viability is the biggest one, right? Like Adam said, you're mostly constrained by the layout of what you're working with. If all things are equal, a design where you don't have to stack tenants on top of each other is preferred, both from a construction point of view, because the kind of fireproofing you're doing between levels is a little bit different, and from a noise management point of view, right? If somebody's jumping up and down, you're just jumping up and down over your own unit, you're not disturbing tenants underneath. So there's less noise management as well.
maybe
But all things being equal is not often the case.
maybe the counterpoint to that would be that maybe tenants are so happy that there's no tenant turnover, and that could be undesirable over the long term.
Exactly. Another question for Adam?
Said that facial configuration that more of a household is one, like 18 square feet. What size of lot do you think you would accommodate that?
Yeah, this was in a R zone, so one of the most permissive for setbacks, but in a 25-foot lot. Yeah, 25 by, I think it was 120. So, yeah, it's the, in this model, it's the living room floor that is the smallest, but then you have a kid's bedroom floor and a primary bedroom floor and a basement to offset the smaller living room floor, but, yeah. Yep.
What's the lot size for your 10 unit?
Yeah, that one, this project wasn't, it's in a regular lot, so it was a corner lot. They weren't called major streets by the new major street policy at the time, but it was kind of, the justification was, it was on the periphery of a neighborhood that kind of like ended here, this on Glen Lake, just 148 Glen Lake. But it wasn't much bigger than a 25-foot lot. It was more just the existing building that was there, which was a bungalow at the time. This one was a little weird because of the topography, so it was on a sloping site that was a little harder to deal with from a construction perspective, but I wish I had the exact lot area.
One more question?
Yep.
For the 4+1 conversions you talked about, either gardens or laneway suites, are there still minimum requirements for green space on those lots?
Yeah. So
And so that hasn't changed even with the change in the policy that we allow for additional units? I imagine there has to be some sort of.
Yeah.
Action that doesn't require green space, right?
they have laneway specific and garden suite specific landscaping requirements. For the garden suite, it's the entire rear yard, so it's basically the garden suite can be 40% of the entire rear yard area, and 50% of the entire rear area has to be soft landscaping. Whereas the laneway suite, it just delineates the area between the laneway suite and the main house to heavily landscape, and it's about 85% is what they're asking for there. Yeah. And then really recently, 6 weeks ago maybe, the province came out with some reductions in distance between main houses and laneway suites and garden suites. Still, like, I don't know, no one knows why, but they had limited those at up to 3 units on a lot. So all these 4+1 projects are still in the 7.5 meter distance between the two.
Less space, you can still do additional units.
If you have less total units.
24.
Yeah, and that actually allows you to do straight wall garden suites, whereas all the other projects are still with the angular plane requirement. There has been we heard from a liaison between the city and the province that they're revisiting that because it doesn't make sense, but they've identified Q2 as a time when they're going to give us some new feedback maybe, but
Sure, what was it? Your question? Oh yeah, did you want to actually address that question from
yeah,
the speaker?
yeah. So even in my experience, where we've worked on a ton of townhouses, semi-detached row houses, even in commercial zones, the high level is that you're allowed to build up to your lot line with, and this is, maybe it's not blanket across all the zones, but I'm thinking about residential zones with a 0 setback where you have a party wall. And then there's an opportunity to straddle your party wall if you're extending it back or up on the lot line, if you're increasing it with the party wall agreement. And on the bottom side in the basement level, you need the party wall agreement to excavate and dig down. This is getting into a different topic, but basically building the lowered basement height for both sides, at least on that shared wall. But the party wall agreement has to be in place for that. There's, in the most stringent side, some examiners, and again, this is some examiners' comment, it's not about the physical wall, it's about the loading of the wall. So they want the structure to be fully on the subject property, not on the shared wall. It could be a load-bearing wall. So that might be the nuance that might be driving you crazy.
Yeah, no, I guess in my opinion, I'm not an engineer, like the creation or the addition of the party wall or the footing is an engineering question. It's an engineering issue. And so I was, upset to find out that it's not, the decision is not held within the building department. I have to get permission from my, cantankerous neighbor to extend a structure. And, I just think that really doesn't make sense.
For sure.
And so I was hoping there might be some legal mechanism to interact that.
Yeah, it would just be building up to the property line, not over the property line. That's kind of within your right. I agree. In most cases, though, we've seen that cantankerous neighbors decide that when we're working with underpinning companies, most people want, like, for example, the underpinning to be done because of the net improvement of their property and the construction noise is going to be there one way or another. So it seems like it's something that makes sense to launch.
Is there any possibility that the city might change policy there?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there any
Yeah.
discussion about that?
It hasn't, what I've been hearing lately with, someone was talking about all the changes that are going on. The focus points are more around combustible versus non-combustible construction and things that are becoming more common with these 4+1s. And I haven't seen the party wall agreement topic at the top of it.
Yeah, I think that policy right now leans more towards density. Like there's a lot of discussions around making things easier to build, like the removal of angular planes and stuff like that. But I haven't heard any whisperings around party wall stuff either. Sorry. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Adam. Adam, don't forget to turn off your mic.